My name is Garrett Mitchell, 34 years old, and last Thanksgiving changed everything. While my family fawned over my sister Natalie's engagement, I sat quietly, hiding the fact I'd recently become a federal judge. When the wine flowed, Natalie called me a disgrace to the family for my career choices. Minutes later, her fiancé's colleague walked in, saw me, and immediately bowed. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. Before I tell you how my entire family discovered my secret life, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. The look on my sister's face when her perfect little world collapsed was absolutely priceless. I grew up in a sprawling colonial home in Greenwich, Connecticut, where success wasn't celebrated, it was expected. Our family name carried weight in legal and medical circles thanks to my parents. My father, Frederick Mitchell, was senior partner at Mitchell, Goldstein, and Warren, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in New England. My mother, Beverly, was chief of neurosurgery at Connecticut General. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. Inside our perfectly manicured home, perfection wasn't a goal, it was the minimum standard. From my earliest memories, my sister Natalie set the bar impossibly high. 4 years my senior, she seemed to excel at everything without effort. Perfect grades, perfect extracurriculars, perfect social life. By the time I was in middle school, she was already valedictorian, heading to Yale, and making our parents burst with pride. The Mitchell family had produced another legal prodigy who would follow my father into the family firm. Your sister got straight A's again, my father would announce at dinner, barely glancing at my report card with its mix of A's and B's. She's on track for law review. I was smart, everyone said so, but I lacked Natalie's single-minded dedication to the path our parents had chosen. When I brought home an A- in 7th grade English, my father's disappointment was palpable. Mitchells don't get A-, he said, sliding my report card back across the table. If you applied yourself like your sister, you'd understand that. The only person who seemed to see me for who I was rather than who I wasn't was my grandfather Samuel, a retired state judge. He'd built his career on fairness and compassion rather than the cutthroat corporate approach my father embraced. During summer breaks, I'd escape to his lakeside cottage in New Hampshire, where we'd fish, play chess, and talk about life beyond the suffocating expectations of Greenwich. The law is about justice, Garrett, he'd tell me as we sat on his dock watching the sunset. Not about money or prestige. Your father forgot that somewhere along the way. High school brought academic success. I graduated third in my class, but also deepened my rebellion against my family's narrow definition of achievement. While Natalie had joined the debate team and mock trial, I volunteered at a legal aid clinic in Bridgeport, seeing firsthand how the law affected people who couldn't afford 7-figure retainers. The college decision became the first major battleground. The family plan was clear: Yale undergraduate, then Yale Law, then Mitchell, Goldstein, and Warren. My parents had been laying this groundwork since my birth. We've arranged an interview with Dean Harrington, my father announced one evening, not bothering to ask if Yale was even where I wanted to go. He owes me a favor from the Westbrook merger. I've already accepted at Michigan, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother set down her fork. My father's face reddened. You did what? He finally managed. Their public interest law program is one of the best in the country, I explained. And they offered me a full scholarship. We don't need scholarships, my father snapped. A Mitchell pays his own way. You've always been difficult, Natalie chimed in. But this is just selfish. Do you know how hard Dad worked to maintain connections at Yale? The fight lasted weeks. Threats to cut financial support followed, then cold silence. In the end, my grandfather quietly offered to help with expenses my scholarship didn't cover. And I left for Michigan with my family's disappointment trailing behind me like a shadow. The distance between us grew with every passing year. Natalie graduated with honors, joined my father's firm, and became the golden child fulfilled. Our phone calls became shorter, holiday visits more strained. My parents spoke of Natalie's cases and clients while asking vague, disinterested questions about my studies. "Still on that public defender track?" my father would ask, not bothering to hide his disdain. During my second year at Michigan, my grandfather suffered a minor stroke. I drove through the night to reach his hospital bedside, arriving hours before my parents and Natalie flew in from a client meeting in Chicago. "They mean well," my grandfather whispered to me as I sat beside him. "They just can't see beyond their own version of success." "I know," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. He squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll follow your own path, even when it's harder." I nodded, not knowing then how prophetic his words would be. By graduation, the emotional distance between my family and me had become unbridgeable. They attended my ceremony out of obligation, sitting stiffly as I received my diploma. At dinner afterward, my father raised a perfunctory toast. "To Garrett," he said. "May he find his way back to the Mitchell tradition eventually." I caught Natalie smirking behind her champagne glass. In her mind, I was still the little brother who couldn't measure up. And perhaps she was right. I would never measure up to their standards because I was busy creating my own. Law school at Michigan exceeded my expectations. Free from the shadow of family comparison, I thrived. I graduated in the top 5% of my class, made law review, and had my choice of job offers. My parents assumed I'd finally come to my senses and join a prestigious firm. Skadden ARPs has an excellent starting package, my father mentioned during one of our rare phone calls. I could make a call. "I've already accepted a position," I replied. "Excellent. Where?" "The public defender's office in Detroit." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "You're throwing away your education to defend criminals," he finally said, each word precise and cold. "I'm ensuring constitutional rights apply to everyone, not just people who can afford them," I countered. My first apartment in Detroit was a far cry from Greenwich, a one-bedroom walk-up above a Thai restaurant with questionable health code compliance. My starting salary barely covered rent and student loan payments. But walking into court each morning, knowing I was the only thing standing between my clients and the full weight of the system, gave me purpose my family's wealth never had. The work was grueling. Overwhelming caseloads, limited resources, and judges who often seemed to have decided guilt before the first argument. But occasionally, there were moments of clarity, cases where I could make a real difference. 6 months in, I was assigned to represent 17-year-old Marcus Jones, accused of armed robbery. The evidence seemed damning until I noticed inconsistencies in the police report. Working nights and weekends, I uncovered video footage from a nearby store that placed Marcus blocks away at the time of the robbery. The case caught the attention of Judge Harold Monroe, a 30-year veteran of the federal bench known for his exacting standards and limited patience. "Counselor," he called me into his chambers after dismissing the charges. "That was exceptional work." "Thank you, Your Honor. Just doing my job. If that were true, I wouldn't have called you in here." He studied me over his reading glasses. "You have unusual talent. Are you planning to waste it in the PD's office forever?" That conversation began an unlikely mentorship. Judge Monroe invited me to judicial conferences, connected me with respected attorneys, and gradually helped me build a reputation separate from my family name. When he suggested I apply for a clerkship with the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, I took the leap. The clerkship marked another milestone my family barely acknowledged. My parents sent a generic congratulations card. Natalie didn't call at all. By then, she'd made junior partner at our father's firm and was regularly featured in Connecticut legal publications as a rising star. Over the next 5 years, I built my career methodically. From the clerkship, I moved to the U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecuting white-collar crimes and political corruption. I won cases against defendants represented by firms like my father's, earning respect from colleagues and judges alike. When Judge Monroe called me into his office one afternoon, I assumed he wanted to discuss a case. "The Eastern District has a vacancy," he said without preamble. "I've submitted your name for consideration." "For a federal judgeship?" I was stunned. At 33, I'd be among the youngest federal judges in the country. "You're ready," he said simply. "The judiciary needs minds like yours." The vetting process was intense: background checks, financial disclosures, interviews with senators. Through it all, I kept the possibility secret from my family. Years of dismissal and disappointment had taught me to protect my achievements from their judgment until they were secured. Only my grandfather knew. Sworn to secrecy during one of our fishing weekends. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," he said, tears in his eyes. "This is exactly why the law matters." The Senate confirmation hearing was scheduled during a congressional recess, a stroke of luck that allowed me to avoid publicity that might reach Greenwich. When the votes were tallied and my appointment confirmed, I felt a surreal mix of pride and loneliness. I had reached a pinnacle of legal achievement, and the people who had pushed me toward the law my entire life knew nothing about it. My investiture ceremony was small by design. Judge Monroe spoke eloquently about justice and service. My grandfather sat in the front row, watching as I took the oath to uphold the Constitution. A few colleagues and friends filled the remaining seats. The Washington Post ran a small piece. "Michigan prosecutor becomes one of nation's youngest federal judges." If my family saw it, they never mentioned it. My first year on the bench taught me more than the previous 10 combined. I worked to be fair but firm, to see the humanity in each case while upholding the law. Attorneys who appeared before me quickly learned I expected thorough preparation and ethical conduct. My docket moved efficiently, and my reversal rate remained among the lowest in the district. At home, I told no one about my job except my closest friends. My neighbors knew me as Garrett, who jogged every morning and occasionally brought in their mail when they traveled. On the bench, I was Judge Mitchell, addressed with deference and respect I'd never experienced in my family home. Meanwhile, Natalie's star continued to rise. She made full partner and landed a major pharmaceutical client that doubled the firm's revenue. My parents' Christmas letters detailed her accomplishments while mentioning me only in passing. Garrett continues his legal work in Michigan. I maintained minimal contact, obligatory birthday calls, occasional emails, but kept the truth of my success private. It wasn't about revenge or a dramatic reveal. I simply couldn't face another dismissal of my achievements as somehow less valuable than hers. Then came the invitation that would change everything. The embossed envelope arrived in October, addressed in my mother's elegant handwriting. Inside was an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, along with a handwritten note. "Garrett, Natalie has wonderful news to share. We expect you to attend. Love, Mother." The wonderful news wasn't hard to guess. Social media had already revealed Natalie's engagement to Bradley Wilson, a partner at Woodman, Brooks and Associates, a firm even more prestigious than my father's. Their engagement photos looked like something from a luxury magazine, Natalie's perfect smile, Bradley's Kennedy-esque good looks, and a diamond ring that probably cost more than my first year's salary as a judge. My initial instinct was to decline. Thanksgiving with the Mitchells had always been less about gratitude and more about keeping score, promotions mentioned, bonuses compared, achievements ranked. As the family disappointment, my role was well established. But something in my mother's phrasing, "We expect you to attend," rather than, "We hope you'll join us," stirred the old rebellion in me. After years of independence, I still let their expectations get under my skin. I called my grandfather for advice. "It's been 3 years since you've seen them," he reminded me gently. "People can change." "The Mitchells?" "Doubtful. You're a Mitchell too," he pointed out. And you changed. After a week of deliberation, I RSVP'd affirmatively and booked a flight to Connecticut. Shopping for gifts was an exercise in frustrated psychology. What do you buy for family members who have everything and value nothing you've accomplished? I finally settled on an expensive bottle of scotch for my father, a silk scarf from a Detroit designer for my mother, and a first edition of a legal history text for Natalie and Bradley. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I packed a single suitcase and locked up my apartment. My clerk, Diana, had prepared a briefing binder for cases I'd hear the following Monday. "Sure you don't want to tell them?" she asked as she handed me the materials. "It's been, 7 years since you took the bench?" 5, I corrected. "And no. This trip is about Natalie's engagement, not my career. Judge Mitchell," she said with the direct look that made her an excellent clerk, "it's never just about one thing with family." How right she was. I arrived at Bradley International Airport Wednesday evening, rented a modest sedan, and drove through familiar Connecticut landscapes toward Greenwich. The family home looked exactly as I remembered, Georgian colonial, perfect symmetry, tasteful holiday decorations that stopped just short of festive. My mother answered the door, kissing my cheek. "Garrett, you look thin. Is that a gray hair? Come in before you catch cold." "No. I've missed you." Or, "It's good to see you." Just straight to the critique. Some things never changed. My father was in his study, of course, on a call he described as very important, can't be interrupted. Natalie was in the kitchen with my mother's housekeeper, Martha, discussing menu adjustments for Bradley's shellfish allergy. "Baby brother," Natalie said when I entered, giving me a quick, perfunctory hug. "You made it. Bradley's working late, but he'll join us tomorrow. Congratulations on your engagement," I said, genuinely happy for her despite our complicated relationship. "Bradley seems impressive." "He is," she replied with that familiar competitive edge. "Youngest partner at Women Brooks, and he's handling the Westridge merger personally." "That's great," I said, refusing to take the bait. "Where did you two meet?" "Charity gala for the Children's Hospital. He outbid everyone for a silent auction package I wanted." She smiled at the memory, then offered to share it with me. 9 months later, here we are. Dinner that first night was awkward but bearable, mostly catching up on extended family gossip and reminiscing about holidays past. My father joined us halfway through, finally off his call, and immediately dominated the conversation with stories about the firm's recent victories. I noticed he carefully mentioned Natalie's contributions to each case, while my mother nodded approvingly. "And what about you, Garrett?" my mother finally asked as Martha served dessert. "Still with the prosecutor's office?" I considered telling them then, laying out my actual career and watching their reactions. But some stubborn part of me wanted them to show genuine interest first. "I'm not with the U.S. Attorney's Office anymore," I said simply. "I made a change a few years back." "Back to the public defender?" my father asked, not bothering to hide his disapproval. "Something like that," I answered vaguely. "Well, I hope it pays better than your last government job." My mother said, "You're not getting any younger, and that apartment you described sounds dreadful." "I'm comfortable," I assured her, thinking of my spacious condo overlooking the Detroit River. "Comfortable isn't the same as successful," Natalie chimed in. "Bradley and I just bought a summer home in the Hamptons. You should visit sometime, when we're there," she added, as if I might show up uninvited. The conversation moved on, but the message was clear. I remained the family project, the underachiever who needed guidance back to the proper path. Part of me wanted to correct them, to pull out my credentials and demand the respect I'd earned. But a deeper part knew that external validation, even a federal judgeship, wouldn't fix what was broken between us. I excused myself early, claiming jet lag, and retreated to my childhood bedroom. Everything remained exactly as I'd left it after college. Trophies lined up on shelves, law school brochures my father had collected still stacked on the desk. A shrine to the son they'd wanted me to be. Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and cold. I woke early and went for a run through the neighborhood. Past mansions decorated for the holidays and luxury cars and circular driveways. Greenwich hadn't changed, though I had. When I returned, the house was alive with activity. Martha and her assistant were preparing the meal. My mother was arranging flowers and checking place settings. My father was in his study, ostensibly working but really watching football with the sound low. "Bradley just texted," Natalie announced as I came downstairs after showering. "He's wrapping up some documents for the Westridge deal and will be a bit late." She looked annoyed but quickly composed her features. "Occupational hazard of being engaged to the best closer in Connecticut. I'm sure he'll be here soon," my mother soothed, shooting me a look that somehow blamed me for Bradley's absence. Guests began arriving at 2, my mother's sister and her husband, my father's brother and his new wife, 2 couples who were longtime family friends, and my grandfather, who greeted me with a knowing wink. Cocktails were served in the living room, appetizers circulated, and conversation flowed around familiar channels: the stock market, recent vacations, country club politics. I stayed near my grandfather, grateful for his steady presence. He skillfully deflected questions about my career, keeping conversations light. "How are the fish biting up at the lake?" I asked him. "Not as well as they did when you visited last summer," he replied meaningfully. We both knew I'd told him about my appointment during that trip. Dinner was scheduled for 4, but by 4:30, Bradley still hadn't arrived. Natalie checked her phone obsessively, smile growing more strained by the minute. Finally, at 4:45, we heard the front door open. "So sorry, everyone," Bradley called as he strode into the dining room. 6 feet tall with perfect teeth and a politician's handshake, he looked exactly like his Instagram photos. "The Westridge documents needed revisions. You know how it is." Everyone nodded understandingly except me. In my courtroom, tardiness was inexcusable regardless of the reason. After quick introductions, we sat for dinner. I was placed between my aunt and one of my mother's friends, far from both Natalie and my grandfather. As Martha served the first course, Bradley launched into a detailed explanation of the Westridge merger that had delayed him. $17 billion deal, he emphasized. Whitman Brooks is handling everything from antitrust compliance to the tax structure. Fascinating work, my father commented. Natalie's handling a similar merger, though not quite that scale. I caught Natalie's flash of irritation. Even in her moment of engagement celebration, she was being measured against her fiancé. Conversation drifted to politics as the main course was served. My Uncle Roger, always opinionated after his second scotch, began complaining about the justice system. "These activist judges are destroying the country," he declared. "Letting criminals walk on technicalities while honest businesses get buried in red tape." I took a sip of wine, determined to stay silent. My role at these gatherings had never been to share opinions. "What do you think, Garrett?" my aunt asked unexpectedly. "You're in the legal field." All eyes turned to me. I set down my glass carefully. "The law is complex," I said diplomatically. "Constitutional protections exist for a reason, even when they're inconvenient." Bradley laughed. "That sounds like something a public defender would say." "No offense," he added, not sounding the least bit apologetic. "Some of us believe in due process," I replied evenly. "Due process is important," Natalie jumped in. "But Roger has a point about activist judges. Last month, Bradley had a perfectly solid case thrown out because the judge had some pet theory about corporate disclosure requirements. Was it Judge Sanders in the Southern District?" I asked, recognizing the case she was referencing. "Yes," Bradley said, surprised. "How did you know?" "I follow interesting cases," I said with a shrug. "From what I read, the disclosure issues were substantive, not technical. Bradley's expression hardened. With all due respect, unless you've reviewed the briefs personally, you're not qualified to have an opinion. Perhaps not. I conceded, though I had indeed read the entire case file as a professional courtesy to Judge Sanders. Let's not talk shop at dinner. My mother interjected. Bradley, tell us about the honeymoon plans. Bradley launched into a detailed description of a 3-week tour of the Mediterranean, but I noticed him watching me with newfound suspicion. As the meal progressed and wine flowed freely, the carefully maintained veneer of family harmony began to crack. My father criticized my cousin's choice of business school. My aunt commented on my mother's weight. Natalie repeatedly checked her phone beneath the table. Dessert arrived, Martha's famous pumpkin pie, alongside coffee and more wine. My grandfather caught my eye from across the table and gave a subtle head shake, sensing the tension building. I understand congratulations are in order for more than just the engagement, my uncle said to Natalie. Frederick tells me you're being considered for named partner. It's premature to discuss. My father answered before Natalie could speak. But yes, the possibility exists. That's incredible. My mother gushed. Mitchell, Goldstein, Warren, and Mitchell. Has a nice ring to it. 2 Mitchells at the top of Connecticut law. My aunt added. The family legacy secured. I felt rather than saw my grandfather's attention on me. He alone knew that a Mitchell already sat on the federal bench. Well, 1 Mitchell anyway, Natalie said with a pointed look in my direction. Some of us had to maintain the family standards. The table fell awkwardly silent. Natalie, my mother said softly. What? It's no secret that Garrett chose to pursue. She made air quotes. Social justice instead of real achievement. Pro bono work is admirable, but let's not pretend it's in the same league. You have no idea what league I play in, I said quietly. Please, she scoffed. You've been hiding in Detroit for years. When was the last time you even handled a significant case? Do you even have your own office yet? I set down my fork carefully. I have an office. I'm sure it's very nice, my mother said placatingly. Chambers, actually, I corrected. But no one was listening. The point is, Natalie continued, wine loosening her tongue. Some of us took the responsibilities of being a Mitchell seriously. Dad built something remarkable, and I'm proud to carry it forward. She looked directly at me. While you've been playing public defender in Michigan, I've been making actual contributions to the firm and the family name. That's enough, Natalie, my grandfather said firmly. No, it's not, she insisted. We've tiptoed around his choices for years. I'm tired of pretending his career deserves the same respect as what Bradley and I have accomplished. Bradley looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her. Natalie, my father warned. But she was too far gone. You know what? She said, pushing back from the table slightly. I'll just say it. You're a disgrace to this family, Garrett. A Harvard legacy who chose Michigan. A Mitchell who defends criminals instead of building something. An embarrassment we have to explain at every firm function and family gathering. The table fell completely silent. My mother looked mortified. My father stared at his plate. My grandfather started to speak, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Who on earth could that be? My mother asked, clearly relieved for the interruption. Martha hurried to answer the door. A moment later, she returned to the dining room followed by a young man in an expensive suit carrying a leather portfolio. I'm so sorry to interrupt your Thanksgiving, he said, looking around the table nervously. Mr. Wilson, I have the revised Westridge documents that need your signature immediately. Mr. Hargrove said it absolutely couldn't wait until tomorrow. Of course, Bradley said, starting to rise. Let's step into the study. The young man's eyes continued scanning the table until they landed on me. His expression transformed from apologetic to shocked. Judge Mitchell, he said, immediately straightening his posture. Your Honor, I had no idea you would be here. I sincerely apologize for the intrusion. You could have heard a pin drop in the dining room. For 3 endless seconds, no one moved. The young lawyer looked from me to the stunned faces around the table, suddenly realizing he'd stepped into something complicated. Judge Mitchell? My father finally repeated, his voice unnaturally high. Alex. I acknowledged the young man with a nod. It's fine. I believe you have business with Mr. Wilson. Yes, Your Honor. He stammered. Just need signatures on the Westridge amendments before the markets open in Hong Kong. Your Honor? Natalie echoed, looking from me to the lawyer and back again. What is he talking about? Garrett? Bradley had gone pale, frozen halfway between sitting and standing. You're Judge Mitchell? The Mitchell on the federal bench in eastern Michigan? I took a sip of water, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at me. I am. But that's not possible, my mother said faintly. You work for the government. As a lawyer. I do work for the government, I confirmed. As a United States District Court judge. For the past 5 years. The young lawyer was still standing awkwardly by the door, clutching his portfolio. Alex is a second-year associate at Whitman Brooks, I explained. He appeared before me last month on a preliminary motion in the Carson antitrust matter, which I was honored to argue. Your Honor, Alex added quickly, your opinion was extremely well-reasoned. Thank you, I said. Though I believe Mr. Wilson is handling the case now? Yes, sir. He's lead counsel. Which is why these signatures. He gestured with the portfolio. Of course, I said. Don't let us keep you. Bradley finally unfroze, his legal training kicking in despite his shock. Yes. Let's step into the study, Alex. We can discuss the filing details there. As they left, the dining room erupted. A federal judge? My father demanded. For 5 years? How is this possible? Why wouldn't you tell us? My mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. Because of exactly this reaction. My grandfather interjected. Because you never took his career seriously. You knew? My father turned on his father accusingly. Of course I knew. My grandfather replied calmly. I attended his investiture ceremony, while the rest of you were at the firm's holiday party. I added. I did invite you. You all declined. We thought it was some public defender office party. My mother said weakly. You never said anything about becoming a judge. Would it have mattered? I asked honestly. Would you have come? The silence that followed was answer enough. Natalie had been strangely quiet, staring at her plate. Now she looked up. Face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. So you let me go on about family standards and achievements, knowing all along you're a federal judge? You deliberately humiliated me. You humiliated yourself, Natalie. My grandfather said gently. Garrett just didn't correct you. A federal judgeship. My father said, almost to himself. At your age. That's. He seemed to be calculating the prestige value. Quite remarkable, actually. Thank you, I said, not entirely sure if it was a compliment or merely an acknowledgement. The side door opened, and Bradley returned without Alex, his professional composure restored. Judge Mitchell, he said with newfound respect. I apologize for not recognizing you earlier. Your Carson opinion was masterful. I've been studying it to prepare our response. Save it for the courtroom, counselor. I replied, not unkindly. Today we're just family. Of course, he said, taking his seat beside Natalie and squeezing her hand. She pulled away slightly. I'm confused. My aunt broke in. If you're a judge, why do you live in that terrible apartment you described? I laughed despite myself. I don't. I have a condo overlooking the river. I never said my apartment was terrible. That was your assumption. But your clothes. My mother began, gesturing at my simple button-down and slacks. Are from the same tailor who makes my robes, I finished. I don't need Italian suits to command respect in my courtroom. My father was processing this new information visibly, his expression shifting from shock to calculation to something like pride. My son, the federal judge, he said, testing how it sounded. Why didn't you tell us when you were nominated? Would you have believed me? I asked simply. His flinch told me everything. My mother, ever the social navigator, attempted to reset the conversation. Well, this is wonderful news. 2 legal stars in the family. We should celebrate both Natalie's engagement and Garrett's judgeship. 5 years late, I pointed out. Better late than never, my grandfather said with a wink. Bradley, reading the room with a lawyer's precision, saw an opportunity to ingratiate himself. Judge Mitchell, I'd be honored to give you a tour of our offices next time you're in Connecticut. We have several matters that occasionally come before the Eastern Michigan Court. Like the Drayson patent case? I asked innocently. His eyes widened slightly. Yes, exactly. Are you familiar with it? Intimately. It's on my docket for next Thursday. He swallowed hard. I look forward to appearing before you. I'm sure you'll be thoroughly prepared, I said. Unlike today's dinner arrival. My father almost choked on his wine, covering it with a cough. Bradley had the good sense to look embarrassed. As Martha cleared the dessert plates, the conversation continued in fits and starts. My relatives peppered me with questions about notable cases, courthouse security, and whether I wore the robe at all times, a question from my youngest cousin that lightened the mood momentarily. Through it all, Natalie remained uncharacteristically silent, processing the revelation that her disgrace of a brother now occupied a position even her fiancé approached with deference. After dinner, guests moved to the living room for coffee and drinks. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment alone to process the evening's unexpected turn. I was rinsing my hands at the sink when I heard the door swing open behind me. Were you ever going to tell us? Natalie asked, her voice tight. Or did you just plan to ambush me like this? I turned, drying my hands on a kitchen towel. I didn't plan anything, Natalie. Your fiancé's colleague recognized me. That's hardly an ambush. 5 years, Garrett. 5 years you've been a federal judge, and you didn't think to mention it once? Would you have cared? I asked honestly. When I made assistant U.S. attorney, I called to tell you. You said that's nice and changed the subject to your new BMW. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my work because you were genuinely interested, not just to confirm I was still failing to meet family expectations? She crossed her arms defensively. You always had to be different. Michigan instead of Yale. Public service instead of private practice. You chose to separate yourself. I chose a different path, not separation. There's a difference. And keeping your judgeship secret? What was that if not deliberate separation? I leaned against the counter. Self-preservation, maybe. Do you have any idea what it's like to have every achievement measured against an impossible standard? To know that nothing you accomplish will ever be enough in this family? Oh, please. She scoffed. You were the golden boy. Mom and Dad would have done anything for you. As long as I did exactly what they wanted. I countered. As long as I followed your exact footsteps. So instead you became a judge just to prove a point? I became a judge because I earned it, I said firmly. Because I worked hard and built a reputation based on fairness and legal scholarship. Not because of my last name or family connections. Something in my tone must have finally broken through. Natalie's defensive posture softened slightly. Was it really that bad? She asked. More quietly. Growing up as my brother? Before I could answer, the kitchen door swung open again. My father entered, stopping short when he saw us. Everything all right in here? He asked, glancing between us. We're having a private conversation, Dad, Natalie said. About Garrett's situation. he guessed. I think I should be part of this discussion. My situation? I repeated. You mean my federal judgeship? The position I've held for 5 years while you assumed I was still a junior prosecutor or public defender? My father straightened, slipping into the authoritative posture he used when addressing junior associates. Your tone is inappropriate, Garrett. We're trying to understand why you kept this from your family. My tone? I laughed incredulously. 10 minutes ago, you sat silently while Natalie called me a disgrace to this family. Now you're concerned about my tone? That was unfortunate, he conceded. But you deliberately misled us about your career. I didn't mislead anyone. I simply stopped sharing my accomplishments with people who couldn't appreciate them for what they were. Of course, we would have appreciated knowing you're a federal judge. My father insisted. It's a prestigious position. And that's all that matters to you, isn't it? The prestige. Not whether I'm good at my job or find it fulfilling. Just how it looks to your country club friends. The kitchen door opened again, and my mother entered, followed by my grandfather. What's going on? My mother asked. The guests are wondering where everyone went. Garrett is explaining why he thought it appropriate to hide his judgeship from his family for 5 years. My father said. My grandfather made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a groan. Frederick, that's not what's happening here. Stay out of this, Dad. My father snapped. This is between us and our son. Our son who apparently doesn't trust us enough to share his successes. My mother added, hurt evident in her voice. Can you blame him? My grandfather asked quietly. The kitchen fell silent. What is that supposed to mean? My father demanded. My grandfather looked at me, silently asking permission to continue. I nodded slightly. I was there, he said, when Garrett called to tell you he'd been promoted to lead prosecutor on the corruption task force. Do you remember what you said, Frederick? My father frowned. I'm sure I congratulated him. You said that's nice, but it's not exactly making partner, is it? My grandfather quoted precisely. Then you changed the subject to Natalie's new corner office. My mother had the grace to look embarrassed. We've always been proud of both our children. She protested weakly. Have you? I asked. Because from where I stand, you've been proud of Natalie. I've just been the son who needed to try harder, do better, be more like his sister. That's not true. My mother insisted. Isn't it? When I graduated third in my class at Michigan Law, Dad's first comment was that he hoped it would help me transfer to Yale. Michigan is a good school, my father said defensively, but Yale opens different doors. Clearly not. My grandfather pointed out, since Garrett made the federal bench without those Yale doors. The kitchen door swung open once more, and Bradley entered, looking uncomfortable. Everything okay? Guests are starting to notice the entire immediate family is missing. We're having a private discussion, Natalie told him, about Judge Mitchell's position. He guessed, glancing at me with newfound respect. Perhaps I should give you privacy. No, I said, suddenly tired of secrets and private discussions. Stay, Bradley. After all, you'll be family soon. The door opened again, and Martha peered in, clearly confused to find the entire Mitchell family plus Bradley crowded into her workspace. Is everything all right? Should I serve coffee in here instead? We'll be out shortly, Martha, my mother assured her. Just a quick family matter. When the door closed again, I took a deep breath. I didn't tell you about my judgeship because I didn't want to hear how it wasn't good enough. How a district court in Michigan doesn't compare to partnership at Mitchell, Goldstein, and Warren. How public service is admirable but not really success. We would never have said that about a federal judgeship. My father protested. Wouldn't you? I challenged. You said it about everything else I've done. My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. Garrett, whatever we've said or done to make you feel this way, I'm sorry. We've always wanted what's best for you. What you thought was best. I corrected gently. not what actually made me happy or fulfilled. And being a judge makes you happy? Natalie asked, sounding genuinely curious for perhaps the first time. I nodded. Every day, I make decisions that impact people's lives based on the law and justice, not billable hours or client retention. It's exactly where I'm meant to be. I had no idea, she said softly. You never said? You never asked? I pointed out. Not really. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. My father leaned against the counter, looking suddenly older. My mother blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Natalie stared at the floor. Only my grandfather and Bradley seemed comfortable, watching from opposite sides of the room as years of family dynamics unraveled. I should probably check on the guests, my mother finally said, straightening her shoulders and slipping back into hostess mode. In a minute, my father said, surprising us all. He turned to face me directly. You're right, Garrett. We've measured you against standards that weren't fair or relevant to the path you chose. And we've missed knowing the man you've become because of it. Coming from Frederick Mitchell. This was as close to an apology as anyone had ever received. I don't need your approval, I said quietly. I stopped seeking it a long time ago. But I would have liked your support. You have it now, he said firmly. Late, but sincere. My mother wiped away a tear. We are proud of you, Garrett. So very proud. I just wish we'd known to celebrate with you 5 years ago. Better late than never. My grandfather repeated his earlier sentiment with a small smile. Natalie had been watching this exchange silently. Now she stepped forward, looking directly at me. I'm sorry, Garrett. For what I said at dinner and for a lot of things. I didn't understand because I never tried to. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. Thank you, I said simply. Bradley, ever the pragmatist, glanced at his watch. We should probably rejoin the guests. But Judge Mitchell. Garrett. I hope we can start fresh. Not as attorneys and judge, but as family. I extended my hand. I'd like that. As we prepared to return to the living room, my grandfather caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up. In that moment, I felt something shift, not a complete healing of old wounds, but the beginning of a new understanding. One more thing, I said as my father reached for the door. The Carson antitrust case is still on my docket. Bradley, I trust you'll inform your firm about our family connection. He nodded seriously. Of course, Your Honor. I'll file a disclosure first thing Monday morning. Good, I said. Because while I'm happy to start rebuilding family relationships in my courtroom, I expect nothing less than complete ethical compliance and perfect punctuality. For the first time that evening, my father's laugh sounded genuine. That sounds like a Mitchell to me. The following Thursday, I took the bench in courtroom 3 of the Theodore Levin Federal Courthouse, my robes freshly pressed, my demeanor calm and focused. The Carson antitrust matter was second on the docket, and as I'd expected, Bradley had recused himself. In his place stood a senior partner from Whitman Brooks, flanked by Alex, the associate who had inadvertently revealed my identity at Thanksgiving dinner. I handled the case with the same impartiality I brought to every matter before me, though I couldn't help noticing Alex's nervous glances whenever I asked a particularly pointed question. When I ruled partly in favor of their motion and partly against it, the balanced decision seemed to reassure him that family connections wouldn't sway my judicial reasoning. After court adjourned, I was surprised to see Natalie sitting in the back row of the gallery. She waited until the courtroom had emptied before approaching the bench. Permission to approach, Your Honor? She asked with a small smile. Granted, I replied, removing my robe. This is unexpected. I wanted to see you in action, she said, looking around the courtroom with new eyes. It's impressive, Garrett. Really impressive. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. But shouldn't you be in Connecticut, billing hours? I took a personal day, she replied. First one in 3 years, if you can believe it. Actually, I can, I said, remembering her relentless work ethic. Everything okay? She nodded, then hesitated. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Thanksgiving. About us, about the firm, about everything. Really? That sounds ominous. Not ominous, she corrected, clarifying. Watching you today, you're so certain of your place here. So comfortable in your authority. She gestured to the courtroom. It made me wonder if I'm as certain about mine. Having doubts about the family firm? I asked, surprised. Maybe, she admitted. Or maybe just questioning whether I chose it for the right reasons. We walked from the courtroom to my chambers, continuing the conversation in private. For the first time in our adult lives, Natalie asked about my career with genuine interest, how cases were assigned, how I managed my docket, what I found most challenging and rewarding about being a judge. I never understood before, she said finally, why public service mattered so much to you. It's not for everyone, I acknowledged. But for me, it's where I can make the most meaningful contribution. I can see that now, she said. And I'm sorry it took me so long. Before she left to catch her flight back to Connecticut, Natalie surprised me with an invitation. Mom and Dad want to host a belated celebration for your appointment. Nothing fancy, just family. Would you come home for Christmas? 5 years ago, I would have declined immediately, protecting myself from inevitable disappointment. But something had shifted at Thanksgiving, not a complete transformation, but a crack in the wall that had grown between us. I'd like that, I said. The Christmas gathering was different from any Mitchell family event I could remember. My father, usually dominating conversations with stories about the firm, instead asked thoughtful questions about my most interesting cases. My mother had framed an article about my appointment that she'd found in a legal journal and displayed it prominently beside Natalie's law school graduation photo. Most surprising was Natalie herself. 2 days before Christmas, she took me aside and shared that she and Bradley were taking a step back in their relationship. What happened? I asked. Let's just say Thanksgiving was illuminating in more ways than one, she replied. When I saw how quickly he shifted from dismissing your career to networking once he knew you were a judge. Ah, I said, understanding. And the partnership track? Still there, she said. But I'm considering other options too. The Attorney General's office has an opening in their Consumer Protection Division. Public service? I teased gently. What would Dad say? Probably what he said when I mentioned it yesterday, that it's a prestigious position with excellent trial experience. She smiled at my surprised expression. People can change, Garrett. Even Mitchell's. On my last day in Connecticut, my grandfather invited me to lunch at his club, a tradition we'd maintained since my law school days. You know, he said as we finished our meal, I've been a judge, a father, and a grandfather for many years now, and I've learned one thing for certain. What's that? I asked. That the truth has a way of finding its stage, he said. You couldn't have planned a more perfect revelation than what happened at Thanksgiving. Sometimes life delivers justice better than any court. I'm not sure I'd go that far. I laughed. But it was certainly effective. The question is, he continued, what happens now? Will you keep your family at arm's length, or let them be part of your life again? It was a fair question. The Thanksgiving revelation had cleared the air, but decades of misunderstanding couldn't be resolved in a single holiday season. I'm taking it one day at a time, I told him honestly. They're trying. I'm trying. That's all we can do. He nodded approvingly. That's wisdom worthy of the bench, Your Honor. Returning to my courtroom in January, I brought a new perspective to the cases before me. I'd always prided myself on seeing the humanity behind legal arguments. But now I understood even more deeply how people could be trapped in narratives others had written for them. When a young defendant stood before me, pressured into a crime by family expectations. I saw myself at a different crossroads. When corporate attorneys argued that tradition justified questionable practices, I recognized the echoes of my father's voice. These insights made me a better judge, more discerning, more compassionate, more aware of the complex forces that shape human choices. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Natalie called to tell me she'd accepted the position with the Attorney General's office. "Dad's actually proud," she said, sounding surprised. "He says having a Mitchell on both sides of the bench reinforces the family's legal legacy." "He's adapting," I observed. "That's something." "We all are," she replied. "Some of us just took longer than others." My journey from family disappointment to respected judge taught me that success isn't measured by meeting others' expectations, but by having the courage to define and pursue your own path. Standing up for yourself doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it simply means continuing forward despite others' doubts. Letting your achievements speak for themselves. The truth does find its stage eventually. Sometimes dramatically, like at our Thanksgiving table. Sometimes quietly. In the gradual rebuilding of relationships on more authentic foundations. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between meeting others' expectations and following your own path? How did you handle that moment of truth when worlds collided? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening to my journey from family, disgrace, to your honor. Sometimes the most important verdict is the one we deliver on our own lives.